The silent cry Captain Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the cool metal wall of the bridge as the exploration vessel Terranova drifted through the outer rim of the Andromeda sector. 3 months into their deep space survey mission, routine had become almost meditative. Stars wheeled slowly past the main viewport, while her crew of 45 worked quietly at their stations, cataloging new systems and charting safe passage routes for future colonists. Elena had been commanding exploration vessels for 8 years, ever since humanity had developed faster-than-light travel and joined the greater galactic community. At 34, she was young for a deep space captain, but her steady nerves and natural curiosity made her perfect for the job. She loved the silence of space, the way it made her feel both insignificant and profoundly connected to something larger than herself. Dr. Marcus Chon looked up from his science station, his dark eyes troubled behind wire-rimmed glasses. The chief science officer had been with Elena since her first command, and she had learned to read his expressions like a book. The slight furrow in his brow meant he had found something interesting. The way he kept glancing at his screen and then at her meant it was something that concerned him. "Captain," Marcus called softly, his voice cutting through the gentle hum of the ship's systems. "I'm picking up something unusual. It's faint, but it's definitely artificial." Elena walked over to his station, her boots making soft sounds on the deck plating. Marcus had pulled up a complex waveform display on his main screen, with dozens of smaller analysis windows surrounding it. The signal looked chaotic at first glance, but Elena could see underlying patterns in the data. "What am I looking at, Marcus?" she asked, leaning over his shoulder to get a better view. "It's a distress signal," Marcus replied, adjusting his instruments to filter out background radiation. "But it's old, really old. I'm reading transmission patterns that suggest the signal has been broadcasting for at least 300 years, maybe longer." Lieutenant Sarah Torres turned from her navigation console, her blonde hair catching the blue light from her displays. Sarah was the best navigator Elena had ever worked with, able to plot courses through the most dangerous regions of space with uncanny precision. She was also the youngest member of the senior staff at 26, but her skill more than made up for her lack of experience. 300 years? Sarah asked, her voice filled with wonder. That would put it from before the Galactic Accords, before most species even had interstellar travel. Elena felt a familiar tingle of excitement. This was why she loved exploration. Work. Every day brought the possibility of discovering something that could change humanity's understanding of the universe. "Can you trace the source, Marcus?" Marcus worked at his console for several minutes, cross-referencing the signal with stellar cartography databases and running complex calculations. Chief Engineer Dmitry Petrov joined them, his heavy frame moving with surprising grace despite his size. Dmitry was a bear of a man with hands like mechanical vices and a mind that could solve any technical problem. He had served on merchant vessels before joining the exploration corps, and his practical experience made him invaluable. "Signal is coming from the Veil Nebula," Marcus announced finally. "Coordinates are—" "That's strange." "What's strange?" Elena asked. "The signal is originating from inside the nebula's core region. That area is listed as impassable in every navigation database I can access. The radiation levels should be lethal to most known life forms." Dmitry scratched his graying beard thoughtfully. "Maybe that's why the signal has been broadcasting for so long. If no one can get to them, no one can help them." Sarah pulled up a holographic display of the Veil Nebula, its swirling purple and gold clouds beautiful and ominous. The nebula was roughly 3 light-years across, formed by the death throes of an ancient star system. The stellar remnants at its core produced exotic radiation that interfered with most forms of technology. "The navigation charts list this as a no-fly zone," Sarah said, highlighting several warning markers around the nebula. Even the Altarians won't go near it, and they're probably the most advanced spacefaring race in this sector. Elena stared at the nebula display, her mind racing. The signal had been broadcasting for centuries, which meant someone or something had been trapped in there for longer than humanity had been exploring space. It also meant that every other species in the galaxy had either never detected the signal or had chosen to ignore it. Marcus, can you clean up the signal? I want to know if there's any linguistic content. Marcus worked at his station for another hour, running the signal through every analysis program in the ship's computer. Gradually, patterns began to emerge from the static. Mathematical sequences, star charts, and what appeared to be biological data. Most importantly, there were repeated sequences that seemed to be attempts at communication. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice tight with excitement, "this is definitely an intelligent species. The signal contains linguistic patterns, scientific data, even what might be cultural information. Whoever sent this was trying to tell anyone who found it exactly who they were and where they came from." Elena felt her heart rate increase. First contact with a new species was every explorer's dream, but this was different. This wasn't meeting an established civilization with their own territory and technology. This was finding someone who had been crying for help for 3 centuries while the galaxy ignored them. "Pull up the Galactic Council databases," Elena ordered. "I want to know if anyone has ever filed a report about this signal." Sarah worked at her console, accessing the vast information networks that connected all member species of the Galactic Council. The Council was humanity's introduction to galactic civilization, a loose confederation of species that shared technology, trade agreements, and exploration data. Humans were the newest members, having been inducted only 20 years ago. "Captain," Sarah said after several minutes of searching, "I found 17 separate reports filed over the past 250 years. The Altarians detected it first, then the HFY, the Nexari, even the Corvin Empire. All of them classified it as an unknown distress signal from the Veil Nebula. And," Elena prompted, "and they all filed it under unactionable intelligence and moved on. Every single one of them decided it was too dangerous to investigate." Elena felt a cold anger building in her chest. 17 different species had heard someone crying for help and had decided it wasn't worth the risk to respond. She looked around at her crew, seeing the same mixture of outrage and determination on their faces. Dimitri spoke first. "Captain, with respect to the other species, they're all thinking about this wrong. The radiation levels are dangerous, yes, but they're not impossible. We'd need to modify our shielding and maybe jury-rig some additional protection, but it could be done. The real question," Marcus added, "is whether we have the right to make this decision for Earth Command. This could be first contact with previously unknown species. The diplomatic implications alone." Elena walked back to the viewport, staring out at the stars. In the distance, just visible as a faint smudge of light, was the Veil Nebula. Somewhere in that deadly maze of radiation and twisted space-time, someone was still calling for help after 300 years of silence from the galaxy. She thought about the reports Sarah had found. 17 different species, some of them thousands of years more advanced than humanity, had all made the same decision. The risk was too great, the potential reward too small. It was the logical choice, the safe choice, the choice that prioritized their own people over unknown aliens. But Elena had not become an explorer to make safe choices. Asterisk. "Sarah, how long would it take us to reach the nebula?" "At maximum sustainable speed, about 4 days, Captain." "And how long to send a message back to Earth Command?" "Approximately 6 days for a response, given our current position." Elena turned back to her crew. These people had volunteered for deep space exploration, knowing the risks and uncertainties involved. They had signed up to go places where no human had gone before, and to represent the best of humanity to the universe. I'm not going to order anyone into this, Elena said carefully, but I am going to ask for volunteers. Someone out there has been waiting for help for 3 centuries. Every other species in the galaxy has decided they're not worth saving. I think it's time humanity showed the universe what we're really made of. The response was immediate and unanimous. Every officer on the bridge volunteered without hesitation. Within an hour, Elena had confirmation from every department head on the ship. All 45 members of the Terra Nova's crew were ready too. Attempt what 17 other species had deemed impossible. Asterisk. As they changed course toward the Veil Nebula, Elena composed a message to Earth Command explaining their actions. She knew there would be consequences, possibly severe ones. The Exploration Corps was not supposed to make independent first contact. Decisions. But some things were more important than following protocol. The message ended with a simple statement. If we don't return, tell our families we died trying to save someone else's family. That's the kind of species we want to be. The Veil Nebula grew larger in their viewports as they approached, its chaotic beauty hiding centuries of unanswered cries for help. For the first time in 300 years, someone was finally coming. Asterisk the impossible rescue. The Terra Nova shuddered as it entered the outer edge of the Veil Nebula, its hull groaning under the stress of exotic radiation fields that twisted space-time. Itself, Captain Elena Vasquez gripped her command chair as sparks flew from several control panels around the bridge. The ship's enhanced shielding, hastily modified by Chief Engineer Dmitry Petrov during their 4-day journey, was holding but barely. Radiation levels are climbing fast, Dr. Marcus Chohn reported, his voice tense as he monitored the environmental sensors. We're at 60% of hull tolerance, and we're still in the outer layers. Elena could feel the ship fighting against forces that no human vessel was designed to withstand. The nebula's core contained the collapsed remnants of an entire star system, creating gravitational anomalies and energy patterns that defied conventional physics. It was like trying to sail through a hurricane made of pure energy. Slow to quarter impulse, Elena ordered. Dmitri, how are the modifications holding up? Dmitri's voice crackled through the cum from the engine room. The ablative plating is taking a beating, Captain, but we're still sealed. I've rerouted power from non-essential systems to boost the deflector array. We should be able to go deeper, but I wouldn't want to stay long. Lieutenant Sarah Torres worked frantically at her navigation console, trying to plot a safe course through the chaotic energy fields. Captain, I'm reading massive gravitational distortions ahead. It's like the space itself is twisted into knots. On the main screen, the nebula's interior revealed itself as they pushed deeper. Streams of superheated plasma danced between fragments of shattered worlds, while the twisted wreckage of the ancient star system created a maze of deadly obstacles. It was beautiful and terrifying, a monument to cosmic destruction that had claimed an entire civilization. There, Marcus said suddenly, pointing at his sensor display. I'm getting a strong return from the signal source. Distance, 12,000 kilometers, bearing 27 Mark IV. Elena strained to see through the swirling clouds of energized gas. Gradually, shapes began to emerge from the chaos. At first she thought they were asteroids or debris fragments, but as they drew closer, the truth became clear. My God, Sarah, whispered Dot, floating in a relatively stable pocket of space, were the remains of what had once been a magnificent city. Massive crystalline structures, some over a kilometer in length, hung suspended in the void like frozen tears. Many were dark and lifeless, but others still glowed with faint internal light, showing that something still lived within. It's a space habitat, Marcus said, his voice filled with awe. Multiple habitats, actually. They must have evacuated their dying world and tried to find refuge in the nebula's core. "Captain," came Dimitri's voice over the comm. "I'm reading. Massive structural damage to most of those structures. Whatever happened here, it wasn't just the radiation. Something attacked them." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The distress signal hadn't just been a cry for help from natural disaster. Victims. These people had been refugees fleeing some catastrophe, only to be trapped in this radioactive maze and possibly hunted by something else. "Scan for life signs," Elena ordered. Marcus worked at his station for several tense minutes. "I'm reading. Approximately 2,000 life forms distributed across 7 of the intact habitats. Biopatterns are ... unusual. Definitely not human, but the readings suggest they're carbon-based and require similar environmental conditions." "Hail them," Elena said. Sarah opened a communication channel and broadcast on multiple frequencies. The response came immediately, but it wasn't what any of them expected. Instead of words, the signal carried pure emotion, transmitted directly to their minds through some form of telepathic communication. Elena gasped as waves of surprise, hope, and desperate gratitude flooded her consciousness. The alien minds touched, hers with thoughts of joy so intense it brought tears to her eyes. After 3 centuries of solitude, someone had finally heard their call. The telepathic contact gradually resolved into something resembling language. Elena found herself understanding concepts and words as they were shared directly from mind to mind. The species called themselves the Kithara, and they were the last survivors of a race that had once spanned multiple star systems. Ambassador. Kithara, their leader, managed to establish a more stable communication link. Through the telepathic connection, Elena learned their tragic history. The Kithara had been one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy, peaceful and advanced beyond imagination. But their very success had made them targets. A nomadic species, called the Devourers, had swept through Kithara space like a plague, consuming entire worlds and their populations. The refugees in the nebula were all that remained of billions of Kithara, survivors who had fled into the only place the Devourers wouldn't follow, the deadly radiation zone of the Veil Nebula. "We have been calling for 300 years, Kitharas," thoughts whispered in Elena's mind. "So many species heard us, but none would risk the passage." We began to believe the galaxy had abandoned compassion entirely. Elena's heart ached as she sensed the depth of their despair. "Why didn't the other species help you?" "They said the risk was too great for so few survivors. They said we were not their responsibility. They said it would be kinder to let us die quickly than to risk their own people in a rescue attempt." The cold pragmatism of the galactic community hit Elena like a physical blow. 17 different species had performed cost-benefit analyses and decided that 2,000 Kithara lives weren't worth risking their own ships and crews. It was logical, rational, and utterly heartless. "Well," Elena said aloud, her voice carrying to both her crew and the Kithara through the telepathic link, "humanity doesn't think that way." Over the next several hours, Elena learned the full scope of the challenge they faced. The Kithara habitats were failing after centuries of jury-rigged repairs. Their power systems were nearly exhausted. Their life support was beginning to break down, and the constant radiation was slowly poisoning even their advanced biology. Worse, the nebula itself was unstable. The gravitational anomalies were gradually pulling the habitats toward the central stellar remnant, where they would be torn apart by tidal forces. The Kithara had perhaps weeks left before their sanctuary became their tomb. Elena sent an emergency message to Earth Command, requesting immediate assistance. But even at maximum transmission speed, help from Earth was at least 2 weeks away. The Kithara didn't have that long. "Dimitri," Elena called over the comm, "what would it take to tow those habitats out of the nebula?" There was a long pause before Dimitri responded. "Captain, Each of those structures masses more than our entire ship. Even if we could attach tow cables, our engines don't have nearly enough power to move them. Asterisk. What if we had more ships? Maybe a dozen heavy cruisers working together could do it, but we'd need specialized equipment and a lot of luck. Elena closed her eyes and thought. A dozen heavy cruisers was exactly what Earth didn't have in this sector. Humanity's fleet was spread thin across multiple exploration and colonization efforts. By the time sufficient ships could be assembled and dispatched, the Cathara would be dead. But as Elena stood on the bridge, surrounded by the impossible beauty and horror of the Veil Nebula, she remembered something her grandfather had told her. When she was a child, he had been a rescue worker during the great earthquakes on New Geneva, and he had spent his life pulling people out of collapsed buildings and flooded tunnels. The thing about impossible rescues, he had said, is that they're only impossible until someone figures out how to make them possible. Elena opened a channel to the entire ship. This is the captain. I'm not going to lie to you. What we're facing here is beyond anything humanity has ever attempted. We have 2,000 people who are going to die if we don't figure out how to save them, and we have maybe 2 weeks to do it with just one ship and a crew of 45. She paused, looking around at the faces of her bridge crew. Each of them wore the same expression of determination mixed with fear. They were scared, but they weren't backing down. Every other species in the galaxy looked at this situation and decided it was impossible. Maybe they're right. Maybe we're about to attempt something that will get us all killed. But I'd rather die trying to save lives than live knowing we abandoned people who needed help. Elena could feel the Cathara listening through their telepathic link, sensing their growing hope as they realized humanity might actually attempt what everyone else had deemed impossible. Dmitri, I want you to start work on a plan to transfer power from our fusion reactors to their habitats. Marcus, I need you to figure out how to stabilize their life support systems. Sarah, start plotting evacuation routes in case we need to. Abandon some of the damaged structures. As her crew threw themselves into the impossible task, Elena felt Cathara's presence in her mind again. Why? The Cathara leader asked. Why would your species risk everything for strangers? Elena thought about the question as she watched her people work. Humanity was the youngest member of the galactic community, the least advanced, the most naive. Every other species was older, wiser, and more powerful. But apparently, none of them remembered what it meant to help someone just because they needed help. Because, Elena said finally, that's what makes us human. The next 2 weeks would test that humanity to its limits. Working around the clock in the deadly environment of the nebula, Elena's crew performed miracles of engineering and determination. They jerry-rigged power transfer systems that shouldn't have worked, created life support bridges between their ship and the failing habitats, and gradually began the seemingly impossible task of moving structures the size of cities. When the rescue fleet from Earth finally arrived, led by Admiral Rebecca Stone in the massive hospital ship Mercy, they found something unprecedented in galactic history. A single human exploration vessel had not only survived in the deadliest region of space, but had successfully begun evacuating an entire alien civilization. The rescue became legend throughout the galaxy. 17 species had deemed the Cathara beyond help, but humanity had proven them wrong through sheer determination and refusal to accept the impossible. The 2,000 Cathara survivors were eventually relocated to a beautiful world in human space, where they became Earth's closest allies and dearest friends. More importantly, the rescue of the Cathara changed how the galaxy viewed humanity. The young species that had been dismissed as naive and emotional suddenly commanded respect across 1,000 worlds. Other civilizations began to remember what they had lost in their long climb to advancement, the simple willingness to help. others even at great personal cost. Years later, when Captain Elena Vasquez was asked why humanity had succeeded where so many others had failed, her answer was simple. We never forgot that intelligence without compassion is just clever cruelty. The universe has enough clever species. What it needed was someone who still remembered how to care. The Cathara had waited 300 years for someone to answer their call for help. It took humanity less than 3 weeks to prove that the wait had been worth it, and that some things in the universe were still worth believing in.